Watching over a group of 10-year-old boys during a sleepover sounds like an easy way for a teenager to make a quick $100. For 17-year-old Marcus, the plan was simple. Let his younger cousin and his 4 friends play video games in the finished basement until they passed out, while his aunt and uncle were away for the night. It was past midnight. The 5 boys were glued to the television screen, controllers in hand. The basement was loud with the sounds of digital explosions. Then, during a brief pause in the game's audio, Marcus heard something that made his stomach drop. It was the distinct, heavy sound of footsteps walking across the hardwood floor directly above them in the kitchen. Marcus instantly muted the TV. 2 of the kids turned around, having heard it too. Marcus quickly counted the heads in the room. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All the kids were in the basement. His aunt and uncle were out of state. No one else was supposed to be in the house. He looked toward the top of the wooden stairs. The basement door, which he had explicitly closed earlier that evening, was now standing wide open, revealing the dark hallway above. Panic set in. He whispered to the boys to stay completely silent and stay put. He crept quietly up the wooden stairs, intending to just pull the door shut and lock it. But halfway up, he realized a terrifying flaw in the house's design. The basement door only locked from the outside. Before he could reach the top, the heavy, deliberate footsteps in the kitchen began moving toward the basement door. Marcus scrambled back down the stairs, his heart hammering against his ribs. He grabbed the kids and shoved them into the small, unfinished home gym adjacent to the main basement area. He killed all the lights, plunging the basement into absolute darkness, and pulled the gym door shut. In the pitch black, they listened. The heavy boots reached the top of the stairs. Then, the terrifying sound of someone slowly descending the wooden steps echoed in the dark. Thud, thud, thud. One of the younger kids began to softly cry. Marcus clamped a hand over the boy's mouth, terrified the intruder would hear them. He grabbed a heavy metal folding chair and jammed it under the gym door handle, stacking heavy iron barbell weights against the bottom of the door as a barricade. They listened as the intruder walked across the basement carpet. The footsteps stopped right outside the gym door. For a moment, there was dead silence. Then, the brass doorknob began to slowly turn. Marcus threw his entire body weight against the door. The intruder pushed from the other side, but the barbell weights held strong. Realizing the door was barricaded, the intruder gave up. The footsteps rushed back up the stairs and toward the front of the house. Marcus waited in the dark for an agonizing hour before finally leading the kids upstairs. The front door was wide open, and the master bedroom had been completely ransacked. Valuables were stolen, but thanks to Marcus's quick thinking, the kids were never discovered. Babysitting during a severe winter blizzard adds a layer of extreme isolation. You are essentially cut off from the outside world, knowing that if something goes wrong, emergency services cannot easily reach you. Chloe, a 19-year-old college student, was getting paid handsomely to watch a young boy named Matthew for the weekend while his parents were out of town. It was Friday night. Outside, a massive snowstorm was burying the town of Valley Stream. Matthew was fast asleep upstairs, and Chloe was downstairs on the couch, watching a movie with the volume turned low. Just before midnight, the silence of the house was shattered by a violent, aggressive pounding on the solid wood front door. Chloe jumped off the couch. She looked at the clock. No one should be visiting in the middle of a blizzard. Before she could even approach the door, a deep, angry male voice, muffled by the thick wood, yelled out, "Open the door! Open the damn door!" There wasn't just one voice. She could hear at least 2 or 3 men shouting and slamming their fists against the wood. Chloe's blood ran cold. She crept toward the living room window and peeked through a small gap in the blinds. Standing on the dark porch, illuminated only by the porch light, was a man in a heavy winter coat, staring directly back at her through the glass. Chloe screamed, stumbled backward, and ran to the kitchen landline to dial 911. The dispatcher answered, but the news was grim. Because of the severe blizzard conditions and unplowed roads, police response times were severely delayed. They instructed Chloe to grab the child and hide. In her panic, Chloe dropped the phone. She realized the pounding on the front door had suddenly stopped. The house was dead silent again. She took a second, terrifying peek through the living room window. The porch was empty. A split second later, the horrifying sound of shattering glass erupted from the dining room at the back of the house. They had bypassed the heavy front door and were breaking in through a back window. Chloe didn't hesitate. She sprinted up the stairs, knowing she had seconds before the men entered the house. She grabbed a sleeping Matthew from his bed, clamped her hand over his mouth to keep him quiet, and dragged him into his bedroom closet, pulling the louvered doors shut. As they sat in the pitch black, surrounded by toys, Chloe heard the men downstairs laughing and tearing the house apart. Then, the heavy thud of boots began climbing the stairs. The men entered Matthew's bedroom. Chloe held her breath, praying the child wouldn't make a sound. She listened as the men rummaged through the drawers just feet away from where she sat. Suddenly, the faint wail of a police siren cut through the howling wind outside. One of the men cursed loudly. The footsteps scrambled out of the bedroom and rushed down the stairs. By the time the police finally arrived, the men had fled into the blizzard. The police followed 5 sets of deep footprints in the snow, leading away from the property, proving that Chloe and the young boy had been in the house with a gang of 5 violent home invaders. Houses bordered by dense, deep woods offer privacy, but they also provide perfect cover for anyone wanting to watch you unseen. Tyler, a 15-year-old high schooler, was babysitting an 8-year-old boy named Mike in a rural, heavily wooded neighborhood. Late in the afternoon, Tyler decided to take Mike and the family's large golden retriever for a walk on the trails directly behind the house. About 20 minutes into the deep woods, the dog suddenly stopped dead in its tracks. The hair on its back stood up, and it began barking aggressively, pulling hard on the leash, staring into the thick brush. Fearing it was a black bear, Tyler grabbed Mike's shoulder and told him they needed to turn back immediately. As Tyler struggled to pull the barking dog away, he glanced back toward the trees. It wasn't a bear. Standing perfectly still behind a massive oak tree, staring directly at them, was a tall man in dark clothing. Tyler yelled out, asking what the man wanted. The man didn't reply. He simply turned and disappeared into the dense foliage. Deeply unsettled, Tyler practically dragged Mike and the dog all the way back to the house, constantly looking over his shoulder. Once inside, Tyler locked every door and window, pulled the blinds shut, and tried to distract Mike with video games. He convinced himself the man was just a weird hiker. Hours passed. Night fell, completely enveloping the house in darkness. Around 9:00 p.m., a loud clatter came from the back patio. It sounded like a heavy plastic bucket being knocked over onto the concrete. The dog instantly ran to the sliding glass door and began barking viciously at the dark glass. Tyler flipped on the exterior patio light. The large bucket of beach toys had been deliberately kicked over. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't a small animal. Panic setting in, Tyler made a desperate decision. He knew Mike's father kept a hunting rifle in a locked cabinet upstairs. He told Mike to go get the key and bring the unloaded weapon down. As they waited in the living room, strange noises began surrounding the house. A faint tap on the kitchen window, the sound of wind chimes being intentionally pushed. Someone was circling the perimeter in the dark. Finally, Tyler caught movement through a gap in the living room curtains. Walking slowly past the window was the same man from the woods. Tyler grabbed the heavy rifle and stood directly in front of the glass, lifting the weapon to show the intruder they were armed. The man stopped. He didn't run. Instead, he slowly crouched down, pressing his face close to the glass, staring directly into Tyler's eyes with an empty, soulless expression. For 10 agonizing seconds, the man just crouched there like a predator. Then, he finally stood up and walked backward into the dark woods. Tyler didn't sleep a wink that night. A week later, Mike's parents called him, horrified. They explained that police had found evidence of a man living in the woods behind their property, and he had been stalking their house for weeks, watching them through the trees. Babysitting a child who has an active imagination is normal. But when that imagination starts manifesting physically in an empty house, it becomes deeply terrifying. Emily, an 18-year-old experienced babysitter, was hired for an overnight job in an affluent neighborhood to watch a quiet, peculiar 12-year-old boy named Michael. His parents had warned her that Michael was a bit strange and preferred to play alone in the massive walk-in toy closet attached to his bedroom. Throughout the evening, Michael stayed in the closet building elaborate Lego structures. Emily left him alone, but she constantly heard him talking. He wasn't just making sound effects, he was having full whispered conversations with someone who wasn't there. Emily brushed it off, assuming the parents meant he had an imaginary friend. Around 10 p.m., Emily told Michael it was time for bed. He obediently left the closet, got into his bed, and went to sleep. Emily went to the guest room down the hall, exhausted, and quickly fell asleep. Sometime around 3 a.m., Emily was awakened by a sound. It was coming from Michael's bedroom. It was the distinct, sharp clicking sound of hard plastic Legos being sifted through. Annoyed, Emily got out of bed, assuming Michael had woken up to play. She walked down the dark hallway and stepped into his room. "Michael, go back to sleep," she whispered. The plastic sounds instantly stopped, but as Emily looked toward the toy closet, she realized the closet light was completely off. It was pitch black inside. Confused as to how the boy was playing in the dark, she walked over, opened the closet door, and flicked the light switch on. The closet was completely empty. Thinking she was just hearing things in her sleep-deprived state, Emily closed the door, turned the light off, and went back to bed. An hour later, she woke up again. This time, there was a faint glow coming from the hallway. The light inside the toy closet had been turned back on, and the door was pulled shut. Furious, Emily marched down the hall. As she approached the closed closet door, she stopped dead in her tracks. Illuminated by the bright light spilling from the crack beneath the door, she saw the distinct shadows of 2 small feet standing right on the other side of the wood. Then she heard it, a soft, high-pitched child's giggle coming from inside the closet. "Michael, this isn't funny," Emily said, her voice shaking. She grabbed the doorknob and aggressively threw the door open. Emily fell backward onto the carpet, clutching her chest. There was absolutely no one inside the closet. Where the shadows of the feet had just been standing, there was only empty space. Emily slowly turned her head and looked at Michael's bed. The 12-year-old boy was fast asleep, tangled in his blankets, and hadn't moved an inch. Terrified of whatever was playing in that closet, Emily locked Michael's bedroom door, curled up on the floor next to his bed, and didn't close her eyes until the sun came up. When the parents returned, she took her money and left, never mentioning the invisible playmate she had encountered in the dark.